the galaxy had one problem. A problem that refused to go away. A problem that, by all logic, should not have even survived this long. That problem was humanity. And every species that had ever tried to get rid of them had learned the hard way. ***, you can't kill a species that refuses to die ***. The first lesson in failure. Zyrek High Chancellor Vorth Lonter paced before the Galactic Union War Council, his frilled crest pulsing with frustration. We should have wiped them out centuries ago, he growled, slamming a clawed fist against the polished surface of the council table. Every simulation, every strategic model, every war doctrine we've ever developed has shown they should not exist. He gestured towards the floating hollow map in the center of the chamber, marked with the ruins of once proud alien empires, all of them brought down by human intervention. A chorus of murmurs rippled through the assembled leaders, Korthan warlords Veldari admirals, even the enigmatic Thalrek consensus delegates, their liquid forms shifting in discomfort. Because they all knew he wasn't wrong. The humans should have been a footnote in history, another primitive species crushed under the weight of superior galactic civilization. Instead, they had become something else entirely. A plague. A wildfire. A relentless force of nature that no one could snuff out. And that terrified them. Vorth turned to the towering Drekthal strategist, Golvek, whose species had been the first to declare war on humanity. You fought them first, Vorth said. Explain to the council why they still exist. Golvek exhaled heavily, his deep-set eyes flickering with something that might have been shame. Or maybe, fear. We attacked their homeworld with 3 fleets, he said, voice rumbling like distant thunder. We calculated their maximum resistance. We accounted for every defensive advantage they could muster. He flexed his massive talons. We crushed their armies. Burned their cities. Poisoned their skies. He paused. His next words were quiet. And then we lost. Silence. The other council members shifted uncomfortably. Because this was a story they all knew. The Drekthal fleets had flattened Earth's military infrastructure. The war had been decisive, clean, efficient. The humans should have been eradicated. Instead, what followed was a horror story. The survivors didn't surrender. They didn't flee. They adapted. Within months, human resistance cells had emerged across the planet, their technology scavenged from wrecked Drekthal war machines. They fought with an efficiency that defied logic, striking supply lines, sabotaging warships, turning the very ruins of their civilization into weapons. Within a year, the Drekthal forces were in full retreat. Within 5 years, the humans had built their own war fleets, reverse-engineered from the very technology that had been used against them. And within a decade, the Drekthal were the ones begging for peace. Vortha's mandibles clicked in frustration. Your failure was one of mercy. You should have glassed the planet. Golvek's gaze darkened. We tried. The council chamber grew deadly quiet. Golvek leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the assembled leaders. We launched our final attack. Unrestricted bombardment. Total planetary destruction. His throat rumbled. The humans survived anyway. The species that refused to die. The Korthan warlord, Zirekar, hissed in frustration. That was a single war. You think this makes them some kind of indestructible force? Golvek turned his gaze toward him. You fought them next, he said. Tell us. What did you learn? Zirekar's tail flicked behind him, his venomous fangs bared in a grimace. We learned that they're too insane to understand when they should die. He tapped a claw against the table, pulling up a hollow recording of the Battle of Jorah Prime. A human fleet, a small, insignificant force, stood against overwhelming Korthan numbers. By all calculations, they should have been annihilated within minutes. Instead, the humans charged. They didn't retreat. They didn't hesitate. They closed the distance, turned their own ships into guided weapons, rammed into Korthan dreadnoughts at insane speeds. Zirekar snarled. They willingly sacrificed half their fleet just to get within range of our command ships. He zoomed in on the footage. One human vessel, flaming, broken, barely intact, smashed directly into the Korthan flagship. The detonation that followed had torn a hole through the heart of the fleet. A suicidal maneuver. A maneuver that had turned the tide of the battle in their favor. Vorth exhaled. So what you're telling us, he said, is that they're unpredictable. Zirekar scoffed. No. I'm telling you they're insane. The final attempt. The council turned to the final speaker, the Veldari strategist, Enwydich Valis. Her species had launched the most recent extermination campaign against humanity. It had failed. just like all the others. NYH's golden, slit-pupiled eyes scanned the room. Her voice was cold. We assumed they relied on technology, she said. That they could be out-innovated, outpaced, outmatched. She tapped the console, bringing up data. We destroyed their factories, their shipyards, their supply chains. She folded her arms. And they built more, out of the wreckage. Murmurs. NYTH continued. We cut off their food supply. They farmed underground. We wiped out their infrastructure. They built networks out of scavenged enemy comms. We tried to starve them, burn them, freeze them, drown them. And they survived all of it. Her tail flicked behind her, a rare display of emotion. They don't need stability, she said. They don't need order. They can rebuild from nothing. She leaned forward. And the most dangerous part? She zoomed in on the final reports. Every time they survive, they learn. A quiet dread settled over the council. The Korthan warlord. The Drekthal strategist. The Veldari admiral. The Zyrek chancellor. They all knew. The problem with humanity is that they never stay beaten. They don't just endure. They adapt. They evolve. And they always come back stronger. Vorth clenched his fist. This, he growled, pointing to the data before them, is why we must act now. If we do not eliminate them before they gain even more strength. But Golvek's voice rumbled through the chamber, stopping him cold. You still don't understand, Chancellor? The Drekthal's massive eyes gleamed. It's already too late. The War Council chamber was silent. Not the silence of contemplation. Not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a hunted thing realizing that the predator it had been trying to kill was no longer the one being hunted. Vorth Lonter, the Zyrek High Chancellor, refused to accept it. No, he said, his voice a low hiss. It is not too late. We have only failed because we have lacked unity. We have fought them separately, and each of our empires has paid the price. He turned, his frilled crest flaring in determination. But if we fight them together, with the full might of the Galactic Union, we can finally erase this threat from existence. The Gathering Storm. The Galactic Union had never waged total war against humanity before. There had been skirmishes. Wars of conquest, of containment, of attrition. But never a unified effort. And so, when Vorth proposed a final, ultimate solution, the Council listened. And they agreed. For the first time in recorded history, the 12 most powerful species in the galaxy committed to a single war effort. The operation was called Extinction Protocol. A war plan designed not to conquer, not to subjugate, but to wipe humanity out completely. A plan unlike any before. They would not make the same mistakes. The Zyrek Dominion would deploy its entire armada, 3,000 warships strong, to ensure no human escape. The Korthan warlords would unleash their bioplagues, infecting every human colony with diseases engineered to break even their ironclad resilience. The Veldari Ascendancy would harness their gravity weapons, destabilizing entire planets, making them uninhabitable death worlds. The Drekthal Shock Legions would deploy planetary-scale orbital bombardment, reducing human strongholds to rubble before a single soldier set foot. It was unprecedented. A total mobilization. A war effort so overwhelming, so absolute, that not even the human miracle of survival could withstand it. The Council watched as the fleet data compiled before them. 45,000 warships. 12 planetary-scale extinction weapons. A strategic blockade around every known human-controlled sector. Vorth exhaled slowly, staring at the battle map. This, he said, is how we win. The first strike. The war began with fire. Across human space, dozens of worlds fell in a single night. The Korthan bioplague struck hard and fast, reducing entire human populations to corpses before they even knew they were under attack. The Veldari gravity strikes shattered planets, turning once thriving worlds into floating debris fields. Zyrek dreadnoughts descended upon human colonies, exterminating every last survivor with ruthless efficiency. The campaign was brutal. It was overwhelming. It was perfect. For the first time, it seemed the galaxy had finally found the answer to the human problem. The mistake. It took 4 months before they realized something was wrong. A Veldari fleet was the first to go missing. Then a Korthan battle group vanished without a trace. At first, the Council dismissed it as logistical errors. A minor setback in a grander war. Then the supply lines began to break. Entire Zyrek fleets returned from conquered worlds to find their home systems under siege. By human ships. Human fleets that should not have existed anymore. Hashtag the impossible resistance. We burned their colonies. We wiped out their planets. We crushed them. So why are they still here? That was the question on every commander's mind as the first counterattacks began. The humans had been supposed to die. Instead, they had done what they always did. They adapted. The Korthan bioplagues had been reverse-engineered into weapons, redeployed against the very armies that had created them. The shattered worlds had become fortresses, their inhospitable conditions turned against the invaders. And the fleets? The humans had never needed shipyards. They built their war machines inside the wreckage of enemy vessels. They never needed supply lines. They stole them. Every strategy, every perfectly calculated move made by the Council was being turned against them. And the worst part? Humanity had been holding back before. Hashtag the turn of the tide. The first major human victory came at the Battle of Cirrus Prime. A single human fleet of barely 50 warships went up against a Zyrek-led armada of over 1,000 vessels. Logic dictated they should have been annihilated instantly. Instead, they baited the larger fleet into a gravity well, sacrificing 2/3 of their ships to force a collision between Zyrek and Korthan formations. The result? A 1000 ship armada reduced to rubble. The humans had calculated the cost. And they had decided it was worth it. Hashtag the nightmare of war. What followed was not a war. It was an infection. Human forces began striking at the heart of the Union itself. Zyrek homeworlds were hit with stealth bombing raids, deep into their territories. Korthan warlords turned on each other, manipulated by human intelligence networks into civil war. Entire Drekthul legions went missing, later discovered to have been captured and repurposed into human-controlled shock troops. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were winning. And worse, they were evolving. Every failed attack made them stronger. Every dead commander was replaced by a better one. Every mistake the Union made was turned into their next strategy. Hashtag a realization too late. It was Enwydich Velis, the Veldari admiral, who finally spoke the words the others refused to say. We've already lost. Vorthas frills flared in rage. We still have fleets. We still? No. Enwydich's voice was deadly calm. They've already won. She pulled up a final battle report. It wasn't about human attacks. It was about desertion rates among Union forces. Soldiers quitting the war. Commanders surrendering outright. Because they understood something the Council had not. The Union was still fighting to win. But the humans were fighting to survive. And there is nothing in the galaxy more dangerous than a species with nothing left to lose. Hashtag the human problem. Vorth staggered back, his mind racing. We can still negotiate, he whispered. Enwydich turned to him, her golden eyes dark. No, she said. We tried to kill them. They will never forgive us. She exhaled. And now we are the ones who should be afraid. The Galactic Union had stood for 10,000 years. It had survived civil wars, uprisings and political schisms. It had weathered the rise and fall of dozens of empires. It had believed itself indestructible. Now, for the first time in history, it was afraid, and the fear had a name. Humanity. Hashtag the final War Council. The War Council chamber was almost empty now. Once, it had been filled with the most powerful leaders in the galaxy. Now only a handful remained. The Zyrek Dominion had lost over 60% of its fleets. The Korthan warlords were devouring each other, turning their own fleets into warring factions. The Veldari Ascendancy had abandoned half its homeworlds, falling back in defensive retreats that had only delayed the inevitable. And the Drekthul Shock Legions, the most feared ground warriors in the galaxy, had been broken on the battlefields of Kesra IV, torn apart by human guerrilla forces fighting with nothing but scavenged weapons. The Union had poured everything into this war. And they were still losing. Vorth Lanter, Zyrek High Chancellor, looked across the war table, his mandibles clenching. This is impossible, he whispered. How are they doing this? Across from him, Golvek, the Drekthul strategist, stared down at his datapad. His hands were trembling. We underestimated them, he said, voice heavy with exhaustion. We thought they needed structure. We thought they needed leadership, supply chains, central command. He lifted his gaze. But humans don't fight like we do. A heavy silence settled over the remaining leaders. Humans didn't fight wars. They survived them. And that made them impossible to beat. Hashtag the collapse begins. The first real cracks in the Union came at the Battle of Drask Rift. The Union had gathered a final war fleet, a desperate attempt to crush the human resistance in one overwhelming strike. 30,000 warships, the largest armada in history. It should have been an unquestionable victory. Instead, it became a massacre. The humans had lured them in, baiting the fleet into a dead system. No planets, no resources, no way out. Then they detonated the entire star. A weaponized supernova. A calculated sacrifice of a dying red giant. The blast wave wiped out 2/3 of the Union's last fleet before they even knew what was happening. The survivors tried to retreat, only to be met by human raiding forces, lying in wait along every escape route. The greatest fleet in history was reduced to burning wreckage in a single day. And after that, the war was no longer a war. It was a hunt. ####the death of the warlords. The Korthan warlords were the next to fall. Once, their species had been feared as ruthless conquerors, their empire spanning hundreds of systems. Now they were nothing but prey. The humans had learned. The humans had adapted. And now the Korthans were running. Entire war fleets were abandoned, their soldiers deserting en masse rather than face the inevitable slaughter. The last warlord, Zirakar, attempted to negotiate a ceasefire, offering entire planets in exchange for peace. The humans did not respond. 1 week later, his flagship was boarded and captured. He was found floating in space, his escape pod's distress beacon deliberately disabled. The Korthan species, once the galaxy's apex predators, had been reduced to nothing. ###the Siege of Zyrek. Vorth knew it was over when the humans arrived at Zyrek Prime. The homeworld of his people. A planet that had never been invaded. A fortress world, surrounded by the most advanced planetary defenses in the Union. The humans had no business attacking it. They should have been fighting to survive, retreating to whatever colonies they had left. Instead, they came for revenge. The attack was surgical. Human stealth ships slipped through the orbital defenses like ghosts. Zyrek supply depots exploded in fireballs as pre-planted saboteurs. Disguised as refugees. Set off chain detonations. And then, as the Zyrek fleet scrambled to mount a defense, the human warships descended in force. Their fleets were smaller. Their ships were uglier, cruder, covered in battle scars. But they fought like demons. And they did not stop. One by one the defenses collapsed. One by one the cities fell. And by the time Vorth realized they had already lost, the humans were at the palace gates. ###the last transmission. When the human soldiers finally reached the Zyrek High Council, Vorth expected demands. Expected them to offer terms of surrender. Expected anything but what happened next. The lead human, an officer clad in battle-worn armor, face lined with scars, stepped forward. And simply threw something at Vorth's feet. A datapad. The Zyrek Chancellor picked it up with trembling hands. It was a record. Of the Zyrek war crimes against humanity. Of the Korthan genocides. Of the Veldari purges. The humans had documented everything. And at the bottom of the screen, a single line of text. There will be no surrender. Vorth stared up at them, mandibles quivering. Then what do you want? The human officer's gaze was cold. We want you to understand. Vorth's frills flared in confusion. Understand what? The human tilted his head. What it's like to be hunted. And then, with no further words, he raised his weapon. The war ended with one last gunshot. ###the human problem, solved. The Galactic Union no longer existed. The Zyrek Dominion? Gone. The Korthan warlords? Extinct. The Veldari ascendancy? Collapsed. The Drekthal legions? Scattered and broken. In their place, across the ruins of the once great empires, a new power had risen. Humanity. Not as conquerors. Not as tyrants. But as survivors. And now the galaxy belonged to them. The war was over. Not with a treaty. Not with a surrender. Not with peace. But with silence. The Galactic Union was gone. Its great civilizations, those who had once ruled the stars, had either fallen, fled, or been erased entirely. And in their place humanity stood alone. For the first time in history the galaxy was theirs. But victory came with a question that had haunted every human leader, every soldier who had survived the war. Now that we've won, what do we do next? ###the end of the Union. Across the ruins of the former empires, human warships patrolled empty space. Zyrek Prime, once the heart of an empire that had ruled for thousands of years, was now a shattered wasteland. The great Zyrek fleet yards had been stripped bare, their once mighty warships either destroyed or repurposed. The Korthan homeworlds had gone dark, abandoned by the remnants of their people, those who had fled into the void, knowing that to stay meant certain death. The Veldari ascendancy, once the most powerful economic force in the Union, had crumbled into lawless territories, its surviving citizens scrambling to barter for supplies with the very humans they had once sought to exterminate. And the Drekthal? They had chosen death over surrender. And so, they had ceased to exist. The galaxy had turned on humanity trying to wipe them out. And in doing so, it had created the very thing it feared most, a species that had learned to survive at any cost. Now they were the only power left. And they had no one left to fight. ####a broken galaxy. Human forces had no interest in conquest. They did not march into the ruins of the Union and claim its throne. Instead, they withdrew, letting the broken remains of the galaxy sort itself out. Planets once ruled by Union overlords now faced chaos, with no government, no fleets, no armies to protect them. Some tried to rebuild. Some turned on each other, fighting over what little remained. Some begged humanity for leadership, for a new government, a new empire to replace the old. But humanity was tired of war. They did not want to rule. They did not want to conquer. They only wanted to be left alone. And so, they left the galaxy to its fate. They took what they needed, resources, technology, knowledge, and returned to their own worlds, leaving the remnants of the Union to fight over the scraps. The great empires of the past had believed themselves immortal. But in the end, all they had done was build their own graves. #### The last transmission. The final official act of humanity's war was a broadcast, sent across the remains of the Union. A simple message. No threats. No ultimatums. No demands. Just a warning. We did not seek this war. We did not want your worlds. We only wanted to live. There was a pause. Then the voice continued. But you came for us. You tried to wipe us out. And in doing so you taught us how to fight. How to survive. How to win. Another pause. And then the final words. We will not start another war. But if another comes we will end it. We are human. And we are still here. The message echoed across the void, carried by automated beacons that would continue to repeat it for centuries to come. A final reminder to the galaxy. Humanity had survived. And now nothing could kill them. #### A quiet victory. With that, humanity turned away from the stars. They had no interest in ruling what remained. They had won their right to exist. That was enough. And so, as the other species fought over the ruins, humanity simply watched. No longer a hunted species. No longer a problem to be solved. Just a quiet, unstoppable force, waiting, watching, and preparing for whatever came next. And deep in the cold, silent void, beneath the ruins of 1,000 once great empires, the galaxy finally understood. The humans could never be killed. Because the humans would never stop fighting. And now they would never have to fight again. ####.